Hi, this is Alessio. Hope you're well, and welcome to a very special video on the US presidential elections. In this video, I'm going to make two important predictions. Number one, who is the person that is likely to win the Democratic nomination in the primaries? And two, the reason why you're here and watching this video, who is the person most likely to win the US presidential elections this year in 2020 and why? The first thing I need to mention is I am not political and that I do not support any political party or candidate, whether it's left, right, Republican, Democrat, it doesn't matter. I do not support any political party or candidate. And in fact, it doesn't really matter to me at all who wins the election this year. So I want to remain as impartial and objective as possible to be able to do a fair and honest analysis in this video. Number two, this video is not about who should be president and who you want to be president. Alright guys, so this video is not about partisan politics or emotion or things like that. This video is a fair, honest, and logical analysis of who is the person most likely to win the presidential elections this year in 2020 based on the facts that we have in front of us. And finally guys, before we begin, I want to also mention that I know there are some of you watching this video right now who have already made up your mind about who is going to win the presidency this year in 2020. And I understand that. But as I'm sure you also probably agree with me, nothing in politics or in the markets is guaranteed or certain. If you cast your mind back to 4 years ago, you probably remember that in 2016, almost everyone thought that Brexit was not going to happen. But of course they were wrong, and Brexit did happen. In 2016, most people thought that Donald Trump would never become president, but of course they were wrong. By the way, we got that prediction correct. In 2016, we correctly predicted in our videos that Donald Trump was going to become president. All right, guys, let's continue. So the first thing I need to mention, guys, is that to determine who is going to win the presidency this year in 2020, we need to examine two things, and that is voter turnout, number one, and two, the stock market. Now, before we discuss how the stock market impacts the US elections, let's first of all discuss the important subject of voter turnout. In other words, how many people will go out to vote this November. So the first thing we need to establish about voter turnout, or how many people will go out to vote, is understanding the politics in America, or how politics works right now in America. You see, guys, right now in the United States, politics is divided between two main ideas. That is populism on one side and establishment corporate centrism on the other side. So before we discuss what is populism and what is centrism, let's first of all introduce ourselves to who are the populist candidates and who are the centrist candidates. The populist candidates right now are Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard. By the way, Andrew Yang also was a populist candidate until recently before he dropped out. Now, who are the establishment centrist candidates? The establishment centrists are Mayor Bloomberg, Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, and Amy Klobuchar. We'll talk more about them later in this video. By the way, in case you're wondering why is Elizabeth Warren stuck in the middle there, the reason is Elizabeth Warren is playing a strategy that is playing to both the populists on one hand and the establishment centrists on the other hand. And we'll discuss later in this video whether this strategy is going to work or not. Before we discuss the candidates, let's first of all understand what these terms actually mean. What does it mean to be a populist? And what does it mean to be establishment centrist? Let's first of all discuss what is populism. Populism is the idea that a handful of corrupt and very rich billionaires and politicians have rigged the system in their favor so that essentially the economy and pretty much everything works for them, but not for the little guy. People like the average worker in America. So essentially populists believe that too much power and money is invested in the hands of the very few, in the hands of a very few corrupt politicians and billionaires who don't really care about people like you and me. They don't care about the ordinary people out there. They only care about themselves and their special interests. In other words, their donors. So populists believe that the first thing we need to do to fix the system is to have major, radical, systemic change and end corruption. So populists believe that the first thing we need to do also is to take money out of politics. We need to end this corruption by the donor class. We need to stop politicians from taking bribes or money from their special interests. Now, when you think about it, guys, that is not such a radical idea. It actually makes a lot of sense. It is true there's a lot of corruption in politics, and I think we could all do things better to fix the system. Populists also support an idea called Medicare for all. By the way, the idea of Medicare for all, which is essentially universal healthcare, is an idea that's actually supported by many countries around the world. For example, most developed countries around the world, like Canada, Scandinavia, the UK, and even Israel, have a version of what is called Medicare for All. So essentially, populists believe that we need to have Medicare for all and to stop the corruption by pharmaceutical companies who are essentially making a lot of money and profit for themselves at the cost of ordinary Americans who want cheaper and affordable healthcare. It's important to also note that this idea of Medicare for all is popular with 70% of Americans. 70% of Americans actually support this idea of Medicare for all. Populists also believe that we should bring back jobs. In other words, jobs to remain in America and not be shipped and outsourced to countries abroad. Populists also believe that we should end the wars, end foreign regime change wars, and stop intervening in other countries' affairs. And finally, populists believe that we should tax the super rich and the mega wealthy. In other words, populists want to impose a modest tax on Wall Street speculation to be able to fund their other major ideas. By the way, guys, according to a Fox News poll, 70% of Americans on both sides, on both the Republicans and Democrats, support this idea of taxing the super rich. All right, guys, now you're probably wondering, what do the establishment centrist candidates, what do they stand for? What do they want to do? So, guys, the first thing we need to establish is that the establishment centrists do not want major, radical, systemic change. They do not actually support most of the ideas that I just talked about by the populists. So for example, they do not want to end the corruption. They do not want to stop taking money from special interests from the donor classes. They do not support Medicare for all. They support globalism. In other words, they want to continue shipping jobs abroad. They do not support the idea of ending foreign wars. And finally, they do not want to impose any taxes on the super rich. Now, in case you're wondering why they don't support any of those ideas, I'll discuss that later in this video. It should be noted that the main thing that the establishment centrists support are essentially removing President Trump, in other words, defeating President Trump in November, and secondly, business as usual, but with small tweaks around the edges. So essentially, for the establishment centrist candidates, they don't want to have the major radical change that the populist candidates want to impose. And again, we'll discuss that in a bit more detail in a few moments. Now, before we continue, I need to mention something quite important that is relevant here. You see, guys, when Donald Trump ran as a candidate in 2016, he ran as a populist candidate. He did not run as an establishment centrist. As a matter of fact, Donald Trump ran against the establishment back in 2016. You may remember many of his ideas were populist ideas. Let me give you a few examples. For example, President Trump in 2016 said that we should make America great again. What does that mean? What does it mean to make America great again? What it means is that things are not okay now, and we need to have major change to make things better. In fact, listen to what Andrew Yang said recently in this video about why Donald Trump won the presidency back in 2016. Listen to this.
Donald Trump's our president today because he had a very, very simple message for the American people. It was very powerful. He said he wanted to make America great again. What did Hillary Clinton say in response? America's already great. You all remember that? That response did not work for many Americans because the problems in our communities are real.
So guys, as you heard there, Andrew Yang is absolutely right. One of the major reasons why Donald Trump won the presidency back in 2016 is because his message resonated with a lot of people. Basically, most Americans, especially the working class of America, feel they've been ignored for too long by the establishment politicians and the elites. So when Donald Trump ran as a candidate in 2016 and he said, make America great again, he was saying things are not okay right now. What was the message of Democrats back in 2016? No, things are okay right now. Things are good. What are you talking about? And as Andrew Yang said there, that is one of the reasons why Democrats lost the election in 2016, because they failed to recognize that for a lot of Americans, especially in the working class of America, things were not okay. There's too much of a gap between the rich and the poor, and too much power is invested in the hands of the very few. Donald Trump also said in 2016 we should drain the swamp. What does it mean to drain the swamp? It means politicians are corrupt and they're simply puppets to the establishment. Again, this is an idea that is supported by a lot of Americans even today, that too many politicians in America are still corrupt and they're taking bribes and money from their special interests and their donor classes. Donald Trump also said bring back jobs, again, a very popular populist idea. And finally, we should end the wars. Donald Trump made it very clear back in 2016 that the Iraq war was a mistake and that we should not intervene and make foreign wars abroad. Now, there are some of you at this point who might say, well, did President Trump actually carry out those promises he made in 2016? Guys, that is not the subject of this video. That is for a separate debate altogether. What I want to say is that one of the main reasons why Donald Trump won the presidency back in 2016 is because he ran on a very powerful message of change. Powerful ideas that populists in the Democratic Party also now support. Again, candidates like Bernie Sanders. Now you're probably wondering right now, well, why is it that the centrist candidates like Mayor Bloomberg, Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, and Amy Klobuchar, why is it that they do not support this idea of populism? Why is it that they do not support the populist policies and ideas that we just discussed, like ending corruption, Medicare for all, bringing back jobs, and ending foreign wars? The reason is, and I need to be fair here to the establishment centrists, that for centrists, they believe that the major issue of this election is all about one word, which is electability. So what is electability? It's all about who is the person better suited to win against President Trump. Who is the person that is better able to beat President Trump at the elections this November? So in other words, guys, the establishment centrists believe that if you have all these major radical changes that the populists want, like the ones we discussed here, they think that those changes might scare off and intimidate the moderate and conservative voters in America. So the centrist candidates argue that if you go to people and say, well, I want to make all these different changes and I want to do them now in the next few years, that might actually scare off the more moderate voters, the more conservative voters that might actually want to vote Democrat in this election, but they probably won't because they're scared of all these different changes. And also the establishment centrists believe that because Bernie Sanders has labeled himself as a democratic socialist, that this label of democratic socialism will simply scare off voters and they will probably not vote for a Democrat in this election. And therefore President Trump will win. So that is their argument. That is the argument of the centrists. And I got to tell you guys that I personally disagree with the establishment centrists on these points. Because what the centrists are arguing is that people in America simply do not want these major important changes. Again, as I mentioned before, 70% of Americans support the idea of Medicare for all. And also a large majority of Americans are sick to death of this corruption by the corporate elites. So instead of answering to you and the people, they answer only to their donors. So guys, I personally think that the establishment centrists are wrong, that these changes are not popular, and that these changes will cost them the election. Again, let's not forget that these very same populist belief was shared by Donald Trump back in 2016, and it's one of the main reasons why Donald Trump won the presidency back in 2016. So therefore, guys, I personally think that populist candidates like Bernie Sanders are electable. And by the way, it isn't just me who is saying this. Here is the conservative host, S.E. Cupp, who is saying the exact same thing.
Here's the deal. Bernie is electable in ways that Trump was electable in 2016. Bernie, like Trump, is counting not on the support of a majority of Democrats to win the nomination, but on just enough of his very loyal base to carry him over the line. Just like Trump, he's relying on a big field and a divided field to give him the most votes.
The second mistake that I think the establishment centrists are making is that they're making the same mistake they made back in 2016, and they're making this election only about President Trump and not about the actual policies. So remember, guys, the centrists believe that they can win this election simply by making it all about President Trump and removing President Trump. But the truth is, that is the same mistake the centrists made back in 2016 as well, which cost them the election. So I actually think the populist candidates have a better advantage in this election than the centrists, because it seems the populists have the moral advantage. Let me just quickly mention the bit about Elizabeth Warren. As I mentioned before, Elizabeth Warren is playing a strategy that is playing to both the establishment and the populists. And I actually think this strategy probably will not work, because it's actually kind of a lukewarm strategy that I think most Americans are not going to get excited about. It seems the majority of Americans care more about a candidate that is sticking to some very solid ideas and opinions, not someone who's trying to play both sides, the establishment and the populist. So guys, before we talk about the stock market and how the stock market could impact the election, let's first of all make an important prediction. My first prediction is that the person who is most likely to win the Democratic primaries is going to be Bernie Sanders. In other words, the person most likely to win the Democratic primaries is a populist candidate like Bernie Sanders, not an establishment centrist candidate. And the reason is, it seems the energy and the enthusiasm in the Democratic Party is behind populism, not centrism. And the person most likely to have a higher voter turnout is likely to be Bernie Sanders, because he's the person that has energized the base of the Democratic Party. And guys, let's remember, the base of the Democratic Party are populists. They're not centrists. It's worth noting, by the way, that President Trump himself has indicated through video interviews and through leaked recordings that he prefers not to run against Bernie Sanders, that he actually thinks running against Bernie Sanders would be more difficult than if he were to run against a centrist like Mayor Bloomberg.
Frankly, I'd rather run against Bloomberg than Bernie Sanders, because Sanders has real followers, whether you like him or not, whether you agree with him or not. I happen to think it's terrible what he says, but he has followers. Bloomberg's just buying his way in.
Let me also make it very clear that I think this division between populism and centrism in the Democratic Party could be a problem for voter turnout in any case. Because whoever becomes the Democratic nominee, and I think that person could be Bernie Sanders, very likely, that person has to unite both sides. And I personally think that if the candidate ends up being an establishment centrist like Mayor Bloomberg or Joe Biden or Mayor Buttigieg, it is very unlikely that that person is going to unite both sides of the party, populists and the centrists. Actually, I think it's very unlikely the populist voters, people who might vote for Bernie Sanders, it's very unlikely that those people are going to go and vote for a centrist candidate like Mayor Bloomberg. All right, guys, let's talk now about the stock market, how the stock market could impact the US election this year in 2020. The first thing we need to remember is this. Why does the stock market impact the elections? You see, guys, it's no secret that people often vote with their pockets. If people feel they have more money and things are going well, it is more likely they're going to vote for the person that is already president. It is more likely they might vote for the incumbent president or party. Let me also make it very clear. I'm not saying the economy is the same thing as the stock market. They're not. However, I'm going to keep it simple here in this video because it seems in the minds of most Americans, the stock market seems to represent for them the economy. Therefore, it's quite plausible to argue that what the stock market does could very likely impact the result of the US election. For one thing, we've seen in the past how when the economy goes into recession or when the stock market goes into a bear market, that usually has a negative impact on the US election, because what happens is usually the incumbent president loses the election when the economy goes into recession or when the stock market goes into a bear market. For example, you may remember in 2008, when the stock market crashed, the Republican Party at the time lost that election. And in the year 2000, when the dot-com bubble burst and the tech crash started, that also had an impact on the election because the Democrats lost that election that year. We have also seen in the bullish stock market, when the economy is doing well and when the market's doing well, that the election usually swings in favor of the incumbent party. So for example, in 1984, Ronald Reagan won the election that year because the economy and the markets were doing really well. If President Trump is going to win the election this year in 2020, the stock market has to remain in a bull market. Because if the stock market goes into a bear market, as we've seen in the past, in previous years, that could negatively impact the US election and that could weaken President Trump's chances of a re-election. Again, let's remember, people vote with their pockets. If they feel the economy is doing good and if they feel the markets are doing good and their jobs are secure, it is highly probable that the incumbent president or the incumbent party wins the election. However, if the markets go into a bear market, if the economy seems like it's faltering or weakening, people may feel that something is not going wrong with the economy and that something is not quite right. And as a result, they could swing the election against the incumbent party, against the incumbent president. So again, guys, just to repeat, President Trump's most effective argument this election season will be the economy and the stock market. As long as President Trump can keep the stock market steady in a bull market, and as long as the stock market does not crash and fall into a bear market, the probability of President Trump winning the election this year, November 2020, is going to be quite high. However, if the economy falters and the stock market goes into a bear market, especially if the S&P 500 falls below 2,900 or below 3,000, and the Dow falls below 24,000, that could significantly weaken President Trump's argument this election season. Because remember, if the stock market goes into a bear market, if the S&P drops by 16%, which is the minimum required for a bear market according to the Dow theory, then it's going to be very hard for President Trump to argue that he's keeping the economy and the stock market going really well. So again, just to repeat this point, for President Trump to be able to have a high probability of winning the election this year, he needs to keep the stock market above 2,900 on the S&P and 24,000 on the Dow, because that is the cutoff point for a bull and a bear market. All right, guys, here's the fun part, and let's talk about the different scenarios we might have this November. So if this November 2020 we have a centrist candidate, which I think is unlikely, I think it's less probable, but let's say, for example, this November 2020 we have a centrist candidate, like for example, either Bloomberg, Biden, Buttigieg, or Klobuchar. Again, I think that Biden will likely drop out sometime soon. If you combine a centrist candidate with a bull market in stocks, let's say this November, and a bull market in stocks means the S&P has to remain above 2,900 and the Dow has to remain above 24,000. Therefore, if the stock market is in a bull market and we have an establishment centrist in November, then the likely result of that election will be that President Trump will be your next president. In other words, President Trump will have a very high probability, an 80% probability of winning this election in November if you have a matchup of a centrist candidate with a bull market. The central message and the most powerful message that President Trump will have this November 2020 is that he's kept the economy going strong and that he's kept the stock market going strong. So as long as the bull market continues, as long as the stock market continues to do well and remains above 3,000, remains above 2,900 on the S&P, then President Trump can go in this election with a very powerful message and say, look, I've kept the economy strong, I've kept the market strong, and if you elect someone other than me, if you elect my opponent, for example, then very likely the market will crash and the economy will crash as well. Now that's going to be his argument. It doesn't matter whether it's true or not. The bottom line is that most voters, especially independent voters, voters who have not made their minds up this November, will probably accept that message and vote for President Trump in this election. And by the way, guys, here's another reason why this combination could result in President Trump winning. Because you may remember what I said earlier, centrist candidates are unlikely to excite and motivate the base of the Democratic Party. So if you have a centrist candidate like Mayor Bloomberg, for example, or Pete Buttigieg, or let's say Joe Biden, it is highly improbable, highly unlikely that those candidates can excite the base of the Democratic Party. And actually it's quite likely that populist voters, voters who might have voted for Bernie Sanders, probably will stay at home and not go out and vote, let's say for Mayor Bloomberg or Joe Biden, because they feel the nomination was taken away from them by the establishment, for example. So guys, it's really important to remember, if you support President Trump, for example, what you want is a combination of a centrist candidate plus a bull market. That's going to be a good combination with 80% probability for President Trump to win this November. Let's take a look now at the next combination. The next combination is, what if a centrist candidate is running in a bear market? So for a bear market, we need to have the stock market below 2,900 or 3,000 on the S&P or below 24,000 on the Dow. So now if you have a bear market, it's going to be much more difficult for President Trump to go on a message of, I've kept the economy strong, I've kept the market strong, because the market has dropped so significantly lower by at least 16%. It's not looking good, and most voters will simply not find it plausible or acceptable that the market is strong if it's dropped by 16% minimum for a bear market. So therefore, if you have a combination of a centrist candidate with a bear market, it's probable that the Democratic candidate, in other words, that centrist candidate, might just be able to squeeze out a victory at the last minute. Now, if you take a look at that probability rating, I've given that only a 52% probability rating because I think it's going to be a very close one with a centrist candidate and a bear market. In other words, the probability of a Democratic candidate, of a centrist candidate winning the election in November in a bear market in stocks is going to be a very close one. I think it's going to be a very close call, and the Democratic candidate might just be able to squeeze out a victory. But again, it's going to be very close. I'm not very sure about this one, but I'm going to give it a probability of just over 50% for the centrist candidate to be able to win in this election. And again, I'm not sure this one. This could be a close call. Now, what if in November we have a combination of a populist candidate? And I think, again, that's the more likely probability. I think Bernie Sanders very likely will win the nomination this year. And I think quite likely we'll have a populist candidate in November. If you have a populist candidate with a bull market in stocks, again, for a bull market, we need to have the S&P above 2,900. If you have this combination, then it's quite probable that President Trump will still win the election this November. Why? For the same reason I mentioned before. That if the economy remains strong, if the market remains strong, President Trump can go on a very powerful message and say, look, I've kept the market strong, I've kept the economy strong, and if you choose my opponent, then very likely the economy might actually collapse. And President Trump could run on that message. Again, I'm not saying President Trump is correct on that message. I'm just saying that is what he's actually going to run on. That is the message he's going to run on in November. And quite likely he'll be able to win the election with about a 55 to 60% probability. Again, as long as the stock market remains in a bull market, as long as it remains above 3,000 or 2,900 on the S&P. Now, what if you have a populist candidate like Bernie Sanders with a bear market in stocks? What happens then? So if you have a bear market in stocks with a populist candidate, then again, guys, it's less likely for President Trump to be able to win this election. To have a bear market, it means something terrible must have happened in the economy or overall behind the scenes to have pushed the stock market so significantly lower to go into a bear market. So that also means that the sentiment of the public is probably not very good. Usually in bear market situations, people feel less well off, less wealthy, and they feel the economy is not doing very well or the market's not doing very well. Again, remember, in the minds of most voters, the market is a reflection of the economy. So again, I think in this scenario with a populist candidate and a bear market in stocks, it's probable that a Democratic candidate will probably win that election with an 80% probability. Now, I say that with some caution because what you have to also remember is there's massive divisions right now in the Democratic Party between the establishment centrists and the populists. Hey guys, just to give you a quick update. Since I began making this video you just watched, the stock market took a massive plunge below some key levels that we mentioned in this video. In fact, just in the past few days, you probably noticed that the stock market fell below the 3,000 level and below the 2,900 levels that we mentioned in this particular video. So does that change things? Yes, it potentially does. And that means my analysis of the stock market has now become much more complicated than I anticipated. Therefore, I think the safest thing to do would be to wait patiently to see which particular path the market wants to take. And I think very soon in the next few weeks and months, we'll find out. So at the moment, the market has managed to recover slightly above the 2,900 levels and closer to 3,000 levels. The question is, which path will the market now take? Is it going to go back into its bull market territory and make new highs? Or is it potentially going to take another path down into a bear market? And a move into a bear market territory, in other words, below 2,900 and 2,800 levels, could significantly change my analysis here in this video as to who could potentially win the presidential election this year. So guys, I think you'll agree with me. I think the safest thing to do at the moment is to wait a few more weeks and months to see which path the market will take, and then we can have a much better analysis of the markets and indeed of the presidential election this year in 2020. I will have a brand new update for you on this particular video on the presidential elections in the next few weeks and potentially by April this year. Guys, thanks very much indeed. If this video has helped, please give it a like and also please subscribe for future video updates. Thanks very much indeed. Bye for now.